Welcome to part 6 of this 1977 GS750 Restoration. In part 5 I mentioned that I was waiting on some parts, some of the shims, and also there's a broken bolt in one of the cam caps. So rather than wait for those to arrive, I might actually try and get this motor started. You know, the valve clearance is a little bit bigger than normal, but that's okay. I'll put another bolt in temporarily where that cam cap bolt is, yeah, see if we can get this thing running, because I want to just see if the motor runs. Once I've confirmed that it runs okay, then I'll start pulling the bike apart completely. So let's move on from there. So I purchased this fuel petcock restoration kit off the internet somewhere, can't remember. And so I've done a restoration on the fuel tap, give it a bit of a clean, put all new rubbers in there, a little bit of Vaseline around the rubbers. So we'll put some fuel in this tank for the first time since it's been treated, and see if there's any leaks anywhere. If that's okay, then we'll put it on and try and get this motor started. I poured a few litres of fuel in there into the tank, and looks like there's no leaks, so that's a good sign. Next step is to see whether the actual vacuum tap works, so I'll give that a try. So while prime does work, unfortunately applying a vacuum to the vacuum line at the back there, either on main or reserve, doesn't let fuel through, so I'll have to investigate that at some point, but for the purposes of getting the engine running, this will I'll just use prime for now. So I put a temporary bolt in that cam cap cover, put the cam cover back on and torque that down. Spark plugs in, spark plugs wired up. So we'll put the fuel tank on, see how these carburetors are, and see whether there's any leaks there before we start trying to start it. So there's various leaks in the carburetors. One of them's overflowing, so obviously the float valves, there's some sort of problem there. It's sort of trying to start. Let's have a bit of a choke on. A bit of exhaust leak, but not too worried about that. But yeah, a bit of petrol coming out of the fuel tap, plus that vacuum's not working. Carburetor's leaking, so I better check the float levels and the float seals, etc. So I knew that the previous owner had played around with these carburetors, thinking that that was the only problem with the whole engine. I'm going to have to go through exactly what's been going on, but I don't know whether you can see, but for example, the floats on that first carburetor there are at different levels, which is very strange. So I'm going to have to double check all the floats, make sure they do actually float, then check the float levels, double check what jets and things have been put in, any adjustments, go from there. I was hoping these would be in good enough condition to at least start the engine, but obviously it needs a bit more work. So the problem with the fuel tap, where the vacuum wasn't letting the fuel through when it was on or reserve, turns out that it's based on this aftermarket repair kit. So if you look at the diaphragm from the original, there's that thick plate there, and on the repair kit it's just a thin sheet. So the problem is that then pushes this part of it into this assembly at the back there, which means there's nowhere for it to go, so there's no way that was ever going to work. Rather than try and get something like this, I went onto eBay and found this aftermarket replacement, which looks identical, slightly different outlet positions for the fuel and the vacuum line, but apart from that, it should be fine. So rather than muck around with this original system, I'll just replace it with this one. So after roughly setting the float levels in the carburetors and fixing up a few other interesting issues, put them back on to check the float levels. I ended up going back to the original fuel tap, because even the aftermarket whole fuel tap that I bought certainly let fuel go when the vacuum was applied, but when the vacuum was released, the fuel kept flowing. So that's another interesting aftermarket quality issue. So I then found this little adapter out of my vacuum gauge kit that actually fits the drain plugs in the carburetors. So screwed that into the various carburetors and checked the float levels with fuel running through. They're all a bit low, maybe sort of 3 or 4 millimeters low, but not too bad. At least I don't have fuel running out of the overflows now, which is good. So now that it's back on, we might see if the engine starts again, and starts properly this time. So the carburetors are back on. The float levels are a little bit low, but not too bad. Finally managed to get a fuel tap that not only works when the vacuum is applied, but also stops flowing fuel when the vacuum is removed. I ended up going back to mostly the original and the original parts inside. So that seems to be working okay now. So let's see if this thing actually starts. So it's on reserve now. I'm not quite sure how much fuel is in the tank, but should be okay. Choke on. So that's good news. Sounds like it's running on all 4 cylinders. Bit noisy with the exhaust leaks, etc., but that's to be expected. I just put them on temporarily so it wouldn't be super loud, and I'm going to be replacing the exhaust system. So yeah, it seems to start okay and runs okay. When I take the carburetors off again, I'll fix the float levels. But it's a good step forward, so I know at least all the valves and everything are working. Still waiting on the valve shims, so there's still a bit to do on the engine, but at least I know that it runs. So yeah, the engine is finally running after all that work. The valves are now seem to be working okay. Obviously there's a few things to do. Replace that broken bolt, get the correct shim sizes in there, get the float levels on the carburetors sorted, probably balance the carburetors at some point. These old GS motors don't like running without the air cleaner. They tend to get too much air in there, so but that will come at a later date. I've got all that gear, but at least the engine's running now, so I guess the major plan from now on is to pull the engine out and start stripping the bike down completely, sending the frame off for sandblasting and powder coating, and then I can work on the engine on the bench and slowly start sort of putting things back together from a decent frame and making it look as close as possible to original. That's it for episode 6 of this GS750 Restoration series. Hope you're enjoying the series. The engine is running, not particularly well, but it is running. In the next episode we'll look at getting the shims sorted out for the valve clearances and maybe do some work on the carburetors to try and get the engine running a bit better. So see you in episode 7.